Why don't we have maybe Judith? Do you want to introduce the series?
Yes, for sure. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judith Moreno. I'm the administrative coordinator for the Maze Innovation Research Center. And so thank you very much for joining us today at our professional speaker series with Mr. Andy Ellwood. But just before we get started, I wanted to provide some background on the center and what we do. So the center is dedicated specifically to understanding the true nature of innovation and how it benefits society. And so we do this by using an interdisciplinary approach. We examine how innovation advances human potential, productivity, opportunity. We try to discover the best preconditions for innovation, identify how it spreads throughout society, understand the social, economic, and legal barriers to innovation. And also one of our goals is to distribute this knowledge broadly to our students or scholars or policymakers and really just the public in general. And so we do this through faculty and PhD research. Every semester we provide grants for our PhD students and faculty. If you're interested in knowing more about our grant opportunities, feel free to get more information on our website, which is mirc.tamu.edu. There you can sign up for a newsletter and you can receive more information on the events. Now, before we introduce our host, I would like to just quickly announce two of our upcoming events. One is Mr. Curtis Rogers next week on March 24th, and he'll be talking about urban transportation and technology. And finally, our signature event for the semester is our Bitcoin conference, and this is happening on April 16th and 17th. And some of our speakers include Mr. Tim Draper and Mr. Michael Saylor, as well as some other industry speakers. And so one of the goals of the conference is to combine academia and industry into one hybrid conference. If you're interested in joining virtually or in person, registration is going on right now. For any more information about our conferences or grants, maybe job opportunities or any other events, again, just please be sure to visit our website, mirc.tamu.edu. All right, so with this said, we're ready to get started, and it is my pleasure to introduce our host for this event, and this is Dr. Karok Ray, who's also the director of the center. So Dr. Ray, welcome.
Thank you, Judith. Okay, thanks very much. That was fabulous. Hello, everyone. This is Karok. I'm the director of the center, Maze Innovation Research Center. We're delighted to have Andy here. So this is before I introduce Andy, I just want to follow up on what Judith said about our conference. Our Bitcoin conference is our signature event for the semester. It's going to be fabulous. We have a lot of high-profile speakers. Not just Michael Saylor and Tim Draper, also Ray Dalio, and the founders of several major funds like Silver Lake Capital, as well as Bill Miller of the famous value investor. And we've got the head of the Dallas Fed, Robert Kaplan, the Bitcoin regulator out of DC, Don Stump from the CFTC, and a lot of other famous people. So it's a great conference. I think the easiest is to go to text.ag/Bitcoin and you can go to our registration page. It's free for all A&M people. So A&M students and faculty. So let me, I will talk about that conference throughout today because that's part of our topic for today. But I am delighted to introduce Andy Ellwood. Andy is a longtime friend of A&M as a whole, also our center. He is a serial entrepreneur. He's graduated from Maze in 2004 in the finance department. He lives in New York City, and in his life as an entrepreneur, he has started and sold several companies to places like Facebook and Google, and you might have heard of them. He also started an entrepreneurship academy. He used to run the A&M Club of New York City. He's currently at the company Basket. And he bought his first Bitcoin at $225 a long time ago. So he was an early adopter. So today he's going to talk to us about, we're just going to have kind of an open conversation about Bitcoin and blockchain and sort of his view of the whole industry coming from New York City. So Andy, why don't we get started? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your Bitcoin story. How did you get into it? How it came to be?
Sure, absolutely. First off, I just want to say, thank you for having me. And it's, these are the types of conversations that I wish we were having in person, but I think that as a result of the virtual world, and we've all learned to adopt and embrace Zoom, we can have these types of conversations more frequently. And so to everybody who's joining, excited that we're going to definitely dive into some Q&A throughout the time. So we'll probably open it up, probably the second half of our time, and just raise your hand and we'll kind of address things. But I've been, as you said, I was a finance major at A&M, and I've always been intrigued by taking business models that worked in one place and seeing if they can work in another place. So you mentioned some of the startups that I'd worked at. The first startup that I jumped into was a company called Gowalla, which was an early Foursquare competitor back in 2009, 2010, and building out kind of the place ecosystem through collective knowledge. We crowdsourced over 2 million individual locations across the world before we were acquired by Facebook. From there, I moved on to open the New York office for Waze as they were expanding from Israel and coming into the US. And in that process, we crowdsourced traffic information and built a brand new map on top of the world. And so it was all about that collective knowledge and all coming together to say, I'll contribute one piece. And if the company does a good job on the back end, that one piece plugs into all the other pieces, and then we get personalized information that comes back to us. And now with basket.com, very similar story. We built the first ever smart shopping list that allows you to make sure that you never overpay for groceries again. And in doing so, we're asking people to contribute the prices that they paid for their groceries this week. And then that goes into our database, and the collective knowledge moves through it again. And so when I first heard about Bitcoin, and I didn't understand blockchain at all at that point, I just heard about Bitcoin. It was in 2014, I think, 2015. And somebody said, hey, it's a decentralized currency, and it exists outside of federal regulation. It exists outside of country states. And I said, well, that's pretty interesting. Growing up in a Texas libertarian and now being, somewhere right of left center, in New York City, that jives with, kind of the way that I've thought about what I want out of the world and the systems in the world. And so I said, cool. How does it work? They're like, you just buy one. And I was like, okay. So I bought one, and it was, $225, and I held on to it. But then I started to think about the underlying systems when I started to learn a little bit more about Ethereum, with Ethereum having a very large presence in New York City. A lot of the people building on top of it, as well as the foundation and actually the corporate headquarters being here. Ethereum started to really kind of catch my fancy. And I remember going to a blockchain conference in 2017 or something like that, and there was like 50 of us in the room. And everybody's like, it's going to the moon. And those people are still saying it's going to the moon, here, however many years later. And I think that the thing that intrigued me was the idea of kind of being able to build something that could self-regulate, that could, if you wrote the contracts correctly, it could move things through very quickly. And I think one of the first places that I really saw that application coming true was, you mentioned the entrepreneurship boot camp that I helped build. It was in South America. And we were constantly, we had the U.S. entity, and then we had our South American, partnerships, right? And whenever we would be accepting tuition, right, it would be coming in U.S. dollars, but then we'd have to, wire it, and it would take a couple of days to process, and then had to be translated into a different currency, and then it would pop out the other side, and we'd actually be able to use it in Chile or Brazil or Colombia or wherever the team was at the time. And when we started doing those transactions across cryptocurrency, you're really able to see the speed with which you could start to do those things. So then you start thinking about remittances, and you start thinking about people that are sending money back to their families if they live overseas. And you start to think about all the different places that having a financial system that does not have to be regulated to the extent, or at least doesn't have to be, the piping for the financial system doesn't have to exist in the way that it does currently, where I can't go open a bank account without having 17 forms of ID and a utility bill, but now I can literally just go buy a cryptocurrency, and all it takes is just kind of the wiring that we're used to for a lot of the other things across the internet. And so that was the part that really started to intrigue me, was, well, it's something that I'm already doing, but now technology has allowed me to do it faster and cheaper and much more efficiently. And that was really kind of what got me hooked on studying the space and thinking about the space, and really leaning into becoming a purveyor of at least owning tokens, if not eventually at some point, and we can talk about this later, but writing white papers and starting to think about what it would take to build a token, starting to think what it would build to build a blockchain. So that's kind of what kicks it off for me, and has been something that I've been I've been on the right and the wrong side of a couple of the swings. But happy that I have what I have, but obviously would always love to have more.
And what year are we talking when this was happening? I'm going to estimate 2010, 2011?
2014 and 2015 was really when we started to lean into it.
Okay, great. And then what did you do anything aside from learning about it? Did you do anything on your professional capacity, either at the startups you were working on or with your community in New York? Yeah. What did you do?
Yeah. So with Basket, we, in order to get people to contribute information, we came up with effectively a gamified system. So we started with a blank slate of building a grocery shopping list. In order to build a shopping list, you have to have all the stores, all the products inside of all the stores, and all the prices for all the products inside of all the stores. And me and my partner, I'll be honest, we were a little bit naive in understanding exactly what that would take. And so we went to Walmart and we went to Whole Foods and we went to a handful of grocery stores. We're like, hi, we want to build a pricing transparency grocery shopping list. And it's going to show your prices next to their prices, next to their prices. And in hindsight, I understand why they laughed us out of their office. But at the time, I was like, this is what the world needs. We've got Kayak for travel. We've got Auto Trader for cars. We've got Zillow for homes. So let's do it for groceries, the fourth most use of household GDP. And when we started to realize how complex that was, we had to kind of start to find a way to gamify the system. And so what we came up with was this idea of missions. And the missions were, if you scan Coca-Cola products at Target this week, so scan a barcode, type in the price, we'll give you 20 points. If you scan just a Coca-Cola product at any store, we'll give you 10 points. And so we kind of came up with effectively, a token currency for how much each data entry point was worth to us to build it. If you took a photo of a product that was not in our database, a UPC code that we didn't already have in our database, we gave you even more points because that was now a product discovery that we could then spread across the entire rest of it. And in the early days, those points were traded in for T-shirts. They were traded in for, a gift bag. And then eventually we started to trade those points for money on PayPal. And so we actually did this all under the guise of a fake startup. We called it StockUp. And StockUp was never meant to be our brand. It was never what we were going to do, but it was allowed us to build this database. We paid for all of the information, but then that was like 2015, 2016. So we started to hear these ideas around blockchain as it was collecting data, storing information, and actually doing it in a way that was much more efficient than what we were doing. And the idea of actually being able to have all of our algorithms, kind of our price check algorithms that lived inside of a smart contract was something that was really appealing to us. So that if you typed in, $1.99 for a 2 liter of Coca-Cola, and then somebody else typed in $11.99 for a 2 liter of Coca-Cola, we could imagine building a smart contract that would say that is out of bounds, right? So it's not $11.99. They just fat fingered it. They hit the one twice instead of once. And so it actually would disqualify that price and might prompt them, is this the correct price that you meant? Because we had we had upper and lower bounds of every price. And so that's what we did. So we started to build a blockchain, internal blockchain that we called Mass Clarity. And Mass Clarity, we got to the point where we were doing about 2 billion data points over the course of any given month within the system. And we got to the point where we were invited to come speak at the London Stock Exchange. So I did like a 30-minute presentation about blockchain and its uses in commercial interests as well as consumer interests, and really talked about the way that it would allow our data team to focus on the piping and the systems as opposed to cleansing of the data. And that was really something that we were trying to push out there. But this was the end of 2017, and kind of the ICO bubble was just popping, and people were kind of like, wait a second, I don't know if this is real. And so it was a little bit of, I'm sorry, this was the end of 2018. And so it was a little bit of a rough time. We were a little bit slower getting out of the gate with it. But we had some really incredible conversations with people. And I think that's the thing that I'm watching now, maybe most closely, is I still have not seen a consumer use case for blockchain outside of the financial markets. And that's where I think Ethereum when I look at it now, I think has just such a huge opportunity to be something that you could run with. I think blockchain's interesting. I'm sorry, Bitcoin's interesting, but I don't see a whole lot of incentive for a new person to jump in now. If you're a nation state, if you're BlackRock, cool, like, get you some. But I think that Ethereum is what I'm watching and maybe spending more time thinking about, just because, like, you think about the NFT craze that's been happening for the past couple of weeks. NFTs are a fancy car, like there's a car. Ethereum is the gas that funds, that goes inside of all of the cars, right? And NFTs is just one type of a car. And I think that all those things that are being built on top of Ethereum is what's going to make Ethereum a really interesting thing to watch going forward, because it's an actual ecosystem, a community that, for me, has a lot more possibility from the services that could be created, from the companies that could be built on top of it, than Bitcoin. I think that, if you were in early on Bitcoin, congratulations. But there's not a whole lot you're going to do with it. It's not like you can, the good part about gold is you can turn it into jewelry or something. But Bitcoin, you can sit there and watch it, and care about what the price does on a daily basis. But it's, I don't think it's quite as interesting as what Ethereum will do in the next 5 to 10 years.
So this is great. Actually, super interesting, Andy. I mean, I knew you were at Basket. I didn't know actually about the whole blockchain angle. We've got a diverse group on the call, so I wanted just to level set expectations. So maybe just rewind a little bit. So
Sure.
So Bitcoin as the original blockchain was primarily your interest for an investment, and sort of you were curious about the area. Tell us about your opinions on let me frame the debate, the Bitcoin versus blockchain debate.
Sure.
And I discovered this sort of in planning our Bitcoin conference, another plug, this last month, because I realized that when I was gathering speakers, the Bitcoiners were adamantly opposed to have any blockchainers in the room, in the sense that they wanted just Bitcoiners. They're the maximalists. They only believe in Bitcoin as the original blockchain. And on the other side, you could say I think the Ethereum community, but others are taking a more expansive view. Can you comment on that? What's almost become a holy war, and from your vantage point from New York?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely the way that I've started to see it. That if you say anything other than Bitcoin is God, like you get, there's a group of people that will dox you, and you might get canceled as far as they're concerned, especially on Twitter. Like, Bitcoin Twitter is one of the most brutal places to play. I watch it, but it's like I watch it the same way I watch WWE, right? Like it's pure entertainment. It's not meant, I don't take any of it as financial advice, but like, people get into it, and like, if you ever say, hey, what are the environmental impacts of all of the computing power that's happening with Bitcoin? Like, just watch out, right? Like, you can't ask a question. You either full-fledged believe what they believe, or like, literally, please, exit stage left. And I think that's indicative of a lot of the culture we're in right now, as it stands across everything, right? You're either with us or you're against us. Like, there's no like room to have like a small private conversation about like, but what are the long-term implications of it? And unfortunately, I think that there's a very, very strong, community of Bitcoiners that have that point of view. But I will say this: Bitcoin would not be where it is if that community had not been around, right? As we know, with all money is fiat. Fiat being, if you believe that this is worth $1 and I believe this is worth $1, then we will exchange this value for $1, right? We both agree that that's what the price is, right? There's not an underlying value on a $1 bill, except for our belief in that $1 bill. Same thing with Bitcoin, in my opinion. There's not an underlying value that you can say, this is why it's worth this much. You say it's worth that much, I agree with you that it's worth that much, therefore it's worth that much, right? And so I think that's, that piece of it is actually where it gets kind of interesting. You can exchange Bitcoin for goods and services as long as the other person agrees that they are accepting the Bitcoin at that price. So I think that, there's a lot that's going on there. The Stacks Foundation is building on top of Bitcoin. And I think it's really interesting what they're doing. It's a really fascinating group of PhDs that have said, what would it look like if we had smart contracts built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain? And so they're pretty early on into what they're doing, or at least as far as the commercial adoption of it. But they have an entire apps ecosystem that all runs on top of Bitcoin as the blockchain. So it's been interesting to watch what they're doing, and they're starting to do a lot of creator economy promotions and pushing things out. So really interesting conversations there with their founder, Numeed Ali. So he's definitely somebody to watch if you want to see an alternative to just the hardcore store of value version of Bitcoin. So there's definitely that piece of it. But I think the blockchain as a larger community, as a larger implementation, that's where I'm bullish on Ethereum in the long run, because it is it's not just the gold rush, right? But it's actually building infrastructure around this new material that we've discovered, right? It's an actually useful underlying set of principles and programs that I think actually opens up the opportunity for a lot of people to start to say, hey, what would a trustless smart contract based version of an existing enterprise look like? What are the efficiencies that we could create where an if this then that statement is something that doesn't ever need to touch humans' approval? It just knows that if this is true, then that's true. If that's true, then this can be true, and therefore this can be the outcome. And anytime that is measured and ticked, anytime that's measured and verified, you can start to have a lot of efficiencies that will create, I think, in the long run, really great things for all of us that are in the innovation space. But ultimately, and this is for me, how I judge any type of investment or any type of business that I get involved with, is who's the end consumer and how and what value does it have for them? And that's where again, the Ethereum building blocks, I think, are really interesting. And there's already so many other things that are being built on top of that. And I think the whole DeFi, the decentralized finance community is starting to get the same level of religion as what Bitcoin did, but it's much earlier on, and they're building actual true companies that could have market comps that would allow you to say, this is actually worth this because here's a publicly traded company that does the same thing. We're 1/10 of what they're doing, so therefore we should be worth 1/10 of the price, right? There's actual market comps to it where there's no other comp to a Bitcoin. A Bitcoin is, all by itself. It's there's not really something you compare it to for where it exists in society. There's not really a silver, right, to the gold, right? There's not a bronze. There's not quite as many other precious materials that you can compare it to for pricing purposes. Whereas Ethereum, you can actually start to see companies and businesses built on top of the smart contracts, and then they have actual other, similar companies out there in the marketplace that you could assign a value to.
Now, were you using building off the Ethereum blockchain for for Basket?
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
Okay.
And the challenge, and then this was 2017, 2018. So they've actually made a lot of improvements since then. As I mentioned, we were doing about 2 billion data points a month. And so at a certain point, we were concerned about, how many transactions could they process? Because back then there was I think it was 100,000 per minute. And there were some times when that was happening, right? And so thinking through what the speed of processing was is something that we were a little bit concerned. And we did look at a couple other, we talked to the guys at Ripple, which thankfully we didn't go there because that doesn't look like that turned out so well for everybody that was involved. And there were a couple other early builder blockchains that people were trying to push. But ultimately, I think Ethereum, was really backed by a lot of very smart business people that were working on the business case for it, right along the side of working on, what an ETH is actually worth in the crypto community.
And where are you guys now on your project from 2017 to 2018?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it has remained an internal project, just because it was something that as I said, the marketplace just wasn't quite ready for, truthfully, and I think that it's still something we've got in our back pocket. But ultimately, when it's all said and done, we were super early with what we were building for Basket in the first place. And I think that building it and then expecting, our community of crowdsourcers to want to interact with a token that actually, traded outside of our company is something that we were probably 5 years away from that actually being having the adoption that it would take for people to actually want to do that. Because ultimately, what I think it's going to take for there to be true adoption of a consumer token is going to be where you can exchange and use the token fully internally within the ecosystem in which you earned it. And so until Basket, let's say, we launch a grocery delivery service, if you earn Basket tokens while contributing data that you can then use to buy your groceries, and then give us more data about the groceries that you bought, and then you earn more tokens, and then you buy more groceries, that's the type of ecosystem that I think has to exist in order for it to be truly worth establishing a consumer-facing token for your company. But it's the type of thing that gaming is the thing that jumps to mind first. That I think that there's a big opportunity in gaming to build that type of an ecosystem, to be able to build out on top of you earn these tokens inside of the game, and they actually have a monetary value, which previously you would put dollars in order to upgrade your character or in order to build out the audience that you have, or the heroes that you have in your gameplay. But I think that's but I think it's gonna we're a little ways away from being able to truly have internal tokens that exist just within the ecosystem. But I think that the DeFi, the decentralized finance, is actually getting us closer to being able to have that be a reality, because the piping and the infrastructure to be able to process tokens and cryptocurrencies across, and actually have an exchange rate for all of them across all the different markets and all the different trading platforms, I think is on its way.
Now, let me ask you to respond to kind of the classic argument from the maximalists, which is that
Sure.
Of all the potential blockchain applications, none of them actually require a blockchain. They don't really require this consensus mechanism, a distributed ledger, the whole 9 yards. They could just be done with a database or some kind.
Sure.
What do you think about that? At least for Basket, and then beyond your company.
Yeah. I think that that argument is not incorrect, but I think it's incomplete. I think that there are a lot of things that you could just build out a program and be able to, it happens. It's happening with us right now on this Zoom call, right? There was a bunch of buttons that we pushed that said if this person says that they want to log in and they have this code, then they're allowed in, right? And that's just lines of code, right? But I think where it gets interesting is when you start to the governance of it and actually thinking through the way in which you unleash that system and how many people it takes to maintain that system. I think that's where the efficiencies start to come in, and you really start to see things that can exist that don't need a huge team to be maintaining it. And also, I think that there's the decentralized trust factor which is something else that I think is not completely baked into that argument, which is that the ability to I don't own it and you don't own it, we all own enough of it that we can come together and say that this that we're going to move forward in that way. I think that's the part that makes sense, but I'm something that I'm I think is still worth leaning into and kind of discovering. But I agree with you that there's a lot of things that people are saying, well, just put it on the blockchain, and it really doesn't need to be.
Right. Can you tell us about your white papers that you've written in this area? Are they available somewhere, or at least can you summarize what they're saying?
Yeah, no, the 2 white papers that I wrote were for 2 different projects. One for Mass Clarity and the Basket side of things, and one for a project that unfortunately is now defunct. But it was built on the Holochain program. And the thing that I really appreciated about that the Holochain program is that everything that they're building, it actually requires you to have a perfect ledger of debits and credits. So the company, let's say, has 10 million tokens. if they want to issue some out, there's only 10 million total available, and so you can actually watch the debits and credits going back and forth from the treasury to an individual, and then actually from individuals to other individuals as they debit and credit their own accounts. And so it's a different form of accounting. It's something that I think is really interesting and really smart in the way it was set up. But unfortunately, at this point, I have not seen a good killer first use case for it that has survived. And I think that's one of the most interesting parts. And this is something that the FOMO in the blockchain world right now is at an all-time high.
Right.
I think lots of people are very afraid that they're going to miss the next thing. And so they're scrambling and they're paying attention to way too many things and trying to make sense of it. And I think that ultimately, when it's all said and done, the things that are going to succeed are the things that you dive into and actually have some level of control over. And so I think that, if you just want to, be playing the crypto market and have some fun with it, that's awesome. Great. But right now, for me at least, like there's, like this weekend hitting 61,000 on Bitcoin, you could probably predict that because the stimulus checks are coming out and people are messing around over the weekend. But then, Asia had the big sell-off on Monday morning, and now we're back to 55, which, not a huge drop, but that type of volatility is not something that I get super excited about because I've got other things that I'm trying to do during the day. So I probably, pay less attention to it than I used to, just as far as pure crypto. I think if you can find the value in understanding the blockchain and actually, the piping that's being built right now, that I think eventually will allow for the much bigger conversations to be had over the next decade. I think that's where it gets super interesting, and that's probably the piece that I'm most interested in the long run.
So you agree? There's a little bit maybe excess hype right now, but especially maybe in New York. I mean, you might see more of it there. You want to comment on that? I mean, specifically, 'cause those are the title of something you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Well, so I think that ultimately, for better or worse, right? I've been in sales my whole career, right? I started off selling life insurance, and then I sold private jets for Warren Buffett, which was an amazing way to spend my mid-20s, cold calling billionaires and celebrities and saying, "Hey, I've got private jets. Do you want to ride on them?" And fortunately, they took my phone calls and they said yes. And then ultimately, getting into selling startups and building and growing investment. I probably raised at this point like $60 or $70 million, into the startups that I've been a part of. And so it's been really, a wild ride to say the least. But I think that the hype right now that I'm seeing in the marketplace is to your point earlier, it's a little bit of a religious fanaticism.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people that I know who've been in the crypto space for a really long time, kind of feel like they're asking me if I want to join their multi-level marketing program. And if you jump in and you buy Bitcoin now at the low price of $55,000, right, then you'll have the opportunity to see it double when it gets to 110,000. That's not nearly as interesting as it was a year ago, where it's like it's at 5,000, and if it doubles, it'll be at 10,000. It's been there before, right? Yeah. And so I think that but it does kind of feel like if you're in and you're looking for some liquidity, you have to find the next sucker to buy. And I'm not saying that to piss off any of the maximalists or the people that super love Bitcoin, but right now, like as I said earlier, I don't see a whole lot of upside for somebody who hasn't ever bought crypto to jump in and buy some crypto right now. Or at least not Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is having its day, and I think that all the financial markets are starting to hold it as treasury, which is and like I said before, as a store of value, that makes a ton of sense. But unless you're buying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of it, I don't know that it's going to make a huge dent in your in what you're doing. And I may be wrong. It may double in the course of a year, and doubling your money is always awesome. But when I think about the things that I can control in my startup, in other angel investments that I make, and things along those lines, those are things that I can actually influence the outcome of. And at this point, I can tweet about how awesome Bitcoin is all day long, and it's not going to influence the price. and I don't think I'm going to convince that many people. But if I could go build a startup or invest in a startup that's doing something that I believe in, that exists, maybe, definitely outside the blockchain, but also even inside the blockchain, I think that those are the things that I'm tending to focus more of my time on, because ultimately, when it's all said and done, if you own what you can control, I think you sleep better at night.
So you're really well invested in the New York City startup scene. You've been there for a while. You know all the players. Tell us, what has been the influence of Bitcoin and blockchain on this community? Is it for good or for ill? How is it changing? Any trends you see?
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that that I love the most about New York City is that if I'm having dinner with a handful of friends, one of them is in finance, one of them is in advertising, one of them is in entertainment, and one of them is in the restaurant business. If I'm in San Francisco and I'm having dinner with some friends, somebody's in financial tech, advertising tech, entertainment tech, and restaurant tech. And so in New York City, the diversity of how technology fits in is technology. Typically, it's a complement to all of the other industries that are here and thriving. And so I think that that's where, yes, there is a large, blockchain and crypto community in New York City. Absolutely. Gemini's here, right? The Winklevoss twins, company. They've got 24 billion in assets under management now, right? And that's incredible. And they're doing like amazing things, growing, especially in this heyday that's been happening. And I think that there's a lot of companies, a lot of traders that are here, right? A lot of finance guys that figured it out early, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. But I think that thinking about having somebody who's in the blockchain or crypto world, they're bumping up against people that are in the entertainment world and the advertising world and the traditional finance world. And I think that that's the type of melting pot that works really well for Ethereum going forward. But I would say it is not the predominant conversation that's happening across the startup ecosystem, because there's so many other good companies here working across the other industries that are in New York. And that for me is one of the reasons I love building companies in New York and being a part of the ecosystem, is that you actually can, your friends are not all sitting around saying, hey, who followed you on AngelList and who's going to lead your next round of funding? A lot of my friends don't understand, crypto at all and have never owned any of it. And there are still amazing people that are living awesome lives doing really cool things. And, and sometimes they'll ask me about it. And if they are curious, I'm happy to share. But it's not, it's not quite it doesn't dominate the conversation. It's there. And if people want to talk about it, we'll talk about it for hours. But I think that it's, like I said, it's one of my favorite parts about New York City is just the melting pot of industry as well as curiosity. And as we've talked about before, it takes a special type of person to move to New York City. If you're from, I grew up in Plano, Texas. Plano, Texas is way easier to live than New York City is. Like everything's just like, it's like nice, and you just have your car and you drive in your air conditioning, and you don't have to sweat and carry your things with you all day every day. But then it's not New York City, and so the trade-offs are there.
Yeah. Great. Let me open it up for questions. If someone, if you guys have questions, I would say you can, honestly, if you just unmute yourself and start talking, as long as we can self-regulate a little bit, that should be fine.
So I'll ask a question, Korok. I'm Arvind Mahajan. Andy, thanks for being here. Very helpful. So, I know very little about this stuff. I'm trying to learn myself. But one demarcation, I always felt that the cryptocurrency component and blockchain went hand in hand. You have a contracting platform, but you need something to do exchange with. And that exchange takes place through a crypto, through a currency. So in some ways, you cannot separate the blockchain from the medium of exchange. Now, this is my naive way of thinking in some ways.
Sure.
So this demarcation between blockchain and Bitcoin seems somewhat false. And it seems to come, the difference is that one is looking at the currency from an investment perspective, and the other is looking at the application to business perspective. They are coming from very different things, but they are really talking about the same thing. So this opposition which Korok led to seems like a bogus demarcation. It's simply a difference in perspective. Now, the question I had for you was that from what I understand, and we unfortunately get focused on Bitcoin because in a way that's what started this whole conversation, and the price has gone up dramatically. But with Bitcoin, from what I understand in the algorithm, the supply of Bitcoin or the change in supply of Bitcoin asymptotically is going to move towards zero, because mining that is very difficult and it'll converge to zero. So we know there's in the extreme asymptotically a very finite supply. So it can only be used for store of value purpose, not for transaction purpose, because the liquidity is very finite. As opposed to Ethereum, for example, where there are not those limits. And that's why what you said resonated with me, that even if we view this just from an investment medium of exchange currency perspective, Ethereum has more potential than Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think that what you said is a really great point, which is, it's when we think about, crypto has been the first medium of, or has been the first thing that is exchanged, right? So think about a token itself is, we exchange a token because we agree on what the value of that token is. But if you think about that, we can actually now assign value to, in the case of NFTs, a JPEG. A JPEG is now something that has value associated to it, right? And so we can actually say that that JPEG now represents value, and that value is transferred across the blockchain. In the future, I think that that's going to apply to a lot of things that we ascribe value to currently, such as books, music, like things that we would say, hey, I'd pay 99 cents for that. Well, there's going to be a version of that I will transfer this if you transfer me this. And it might be, I'll transfer you a book for a piece of art, because we agree that the value of the two is the same, right? And I think that that's where, to your point, understanding Ethereum as an exchange of value is I think the right way to think about it. I'm sorry, understanding the blockchain as a place to exchange value is a really great way to think about it. And cryptos have been the killer first use case of what it actually means, because it's something that we can understand. We understand the idea of a token. We understand the idea of this token is worth this much, and I'll give you it. And you say, great, I think it's also worth that much. I will accept it. And so now being able to maybe open it up to saying, hey, we can actually assign a specific value to a chapter in a book that it now exists in a PDF. And if you pass the PDF and you have the correct smart contract that says you can open that PDF, well, now you've created that value, and you've swapped that value for something else. Mm-hmm. So I think that what you said is absolutely spot on.
Thank you, Andy.
Andy, I have a question on that, on the part you were talking about for the more, I guess, consumer adoption, was to create an ecosystem where people receive tokens for feeding the network with information, and then they receive tokens, and then they're paying for groceries with tokens. Can you talk more about how that? I didn't quite grasp that whole concept.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that, there's a future world where everybody's really excited about this idea of everything happens online through crypto, or that the tokens that you earn inside of an ecosystem, translating the value that is prescribed in that ecosystem to the outside world is the part that I think is what we're missing as far as that adoption layer, right? So how much is a basket token worth outside of basket.com? We were realizing that we were going to have to actually start serving as the bank to say, the piece of data you gave us is worth 2 cents. If you give us 50 pieces of data, that's worth $1. And you have now accumulated X number of dollars worth of basket tokens. And so we're actually going to have to kind of play central banker there. And that's I think the challenging part is that assigning an external value to a token that is built is earned or mined internally inside of a situation is the challenge. And so I think that because you might as well just have it be worth $1, right? So what are the things that you can do with that token internally that you couldn't do by just having people have cash floating around internally? And I think that's part of what I think the challenge of finding the consumer use case for blockchain tokens inside of a closed network is. But it's something that I think that with the building blocks and the exchanges that are now coming that will allow me to trade just about anything for just about anything else, as long as you and I both agree on the exchange of value being fair, I think that that's what's going to open it up to say a token earned on a closed network or a closed blockchain, but then traded to something that's in the external world for external value. We can actually assign that value going forward.
Okay. So would you say that the basket tokens, would they be exchanged for Ethereum since you were on the Ethereum network, or would they be exchanged for dollar value?
Yeah, so the great part about Ethereum is there's the ETH token, right, and then there's the Ethereum network, and the ETH token is actually it's cryptocurrency, but it is the Ethereum token is built on top of the Ethereum network, right, and the ETH token is the killer first use case of the Ethereum network, and so they're actually they're two separate things. We were building on top of it, and we could have had our own coin, but we probably, to your point, we would have denominated it in Ethereum as just the easiest method of exchange. But then that would then also obviously give us a method of exchange to dollars as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There's some questions in the chat. I can read them out to you. Thoughts on Morgan Stanley adopting Bitcoin?
I think that they have enough reason to own it, right? They certainly have enough in their reserves to jump in and buy enough of it that it moving a couple $1,000 here and there would move their portfolio. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Why does Basket need to be on the blockchain versus just a private database?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to the question that you asked earlier of is it necessary? And then I think and that's where for us it really came down to the speed and the efficiency that we'd be able to create. Because right now, if we could get things kind of being able to actually process payments right now is something that we do every 2 weeks. And it's a team effort for us to go back and actually catalog, understand, and look at all of the different people who need to be paid, and then double checking their work. And with a smart contract, the work would already be double checked. And I think that was the piece for us that was really really appealing. So there are different, and I think that ultimately it was because there was the exchange of value that we were looking at it from the token standpoint. But I think that also that type of a question belies a little bit of why we pulled back from it, because we were not quite to the point where we needed that efficiencies those efficiencies would not have changed the trajectory of our company quite as much as we ultimately had hoped it would. And so that's why we pulled back and never officially released the ICO.
Okay. Let me actually call on some. Edris El-Rachidi, do you want to say your question? Ask your question. Here. Okay, I guess I'll read it. What are your thoughts on ADA and DOT? I guess those are altcoins. I don't know. Do you see these two networks as potential rivals that could catch up to the network effects of Ethereum? Is it a tortoise and a hare race?
Yeah, I think that I don't know ADA as well as I've heard, but I've heard a lot of really good things about DOT. I don't know. I do not own it, and I haven't really done a whole lot of research on it. But and I think that that's the interesting part is that building a blockchain right now, there's a lot of really smart open source projects that are out there, but the ability to distinguish yourself, or the ability to build community and zeitgeist around it, at this point is a really, really long process, right? You don't have the first mover advantage that Bitcoin and Ethereum did. And so you're going to have to come up with a use case that does not exist currently and that has not been thought about. And truthfully, that can't be built on top of Ethereum in order for it to really, catch up. But I think that's the the challenge of a lot of the younger blockchains that are out there. But I do think that there's room for multiple players, just like there's room for Apple and Microsoft and Dell. I think there's a lot of different people that will play in the space. And right now we've got obviously our two big winners. XRP used to be a very close number 3, but now it's it's still in the top 10, but it's not not what it used to be, obviously, with their fall from grace. But I think that there will be a lot of different people that will play in at some point.
Andy, one question I want to ask is I guess for the future Aggies, we have a lot of students on the call. What advice, thoughts do you have to them about this whole new era? I know you're connected to the school a lot, and you do a lot of mentorship for Aggies. What are your thoughts if you had to put yourself back into Maze as a student? Yeah. What advice could you give to your future self or your former self?
Yeah, I think that ultimately when it comes down to it, you have to know why you care. That there's a lot of different things you can care about on, as it relates to blockchain, as it relates to startups, as it relates to technology. But if you don't know why you care about it, if it's just like you're supposed to, you'll lose interest pretty quickly. But I think the great thing about this blockchain space is that there's a lot of different angles you can take and a lot of different pieces you can truly care about. And so thinking through what you'd want to see exist in the world, what you'd want to see become part of the nomenclature for your industry, for your world, for your piece of business, I think is a really savvy way to do it, because everything I know of people building philanthropic platforms on top of blockchain. I know of people that are trying to save the ocean on top of blockchain. I know of people that are working on space meteor harvesting on top of blockchain. I mean, there really is no, but especially if you have anything to do with traditional finance, the opportunities are going to be endless, and it's going to be something that you're going to need to be able to understand at least the basic ideas of smart contracts and the way that value is exchanged across a blockchain, and why having a decentralized permissionless system is an important thing to at least understand, and maybe from where you are or where you're coming from, or the industries that you're jumping in on, somebody hasn't talked about it, right? Somebody hasn't started to build a more efficient way to store that data and to keep that information fresh. Going all the way to the agricultural side of things, right? Like I know of several, farmer projects that are all being built on top of the blockchain, as far as, the price of grain and the price of produce, right? So I think there's a lot of different places and a lot of different ways that you could be thinking about it. But I would say, 1, understand what you care about first. And then 2, understand that this is going to be a part of the conversation going forward, and you're probably going to need to be able to at least be conversational about it, in the way that you are about HTML and about the way that social media works.
Which I want to interpret to say that you should come to our Bitcoin conference.
You should absolutely come to the Bitcoin conference and ask lots of questions about Ethereum to Maximus.
Yeah, exactly right. Actually, I think Arvind said had a good point, which is there's a lot of energy on kind of Bitcoin or Ethereum, but really it's kind of Bitcoin and Ethereum. The space is big enough for both of them. There's no reason to have this civil war.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's like, who's better, the New York Yankees or the Dallas Cowboys? Right? They're both legendary sports teams, but they don't ever play each other. Right. And I think that there's room for both of them to be really good at what they do. Now, if you're talking about the Ethereum token versus Bitcoin, you can have that argument, right? You can have that, how much is it worth? But when you talk about like actually what, Ethereum is gonna do, right? And where it's existing in the world and the ecosystem that they've set up for other, exchanges of value and not just a store of value, it's a different thing. And so, yeah, I think that they both exist in the world. I think it's a fun world to exist in.
Okay, great. Brent, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Hi, Andy. How are you doing?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
Well, that's very interesting. So kind of bring yourself back to the maze. So this is a kind of a self-interested question of mine and maybe of the accountants on the call. You said earlier that Bitcoin or blockchain is kind of remove what is fundamental to that is that the trust there. You don't have to, right? We don't have to have necessarily that trust because we have a distributed ledger and everything. Okay, I teach audit, and I, as a general rule of thumb, and I think most accountants would think, we are there because you can't trust individuals. So we have to have some sort of mechanism there to put some trust back in the system. If we get blockchain working correctly, are we needless? Can we live in a quote trustless society? What are your thoughts on that? Can we get rid of all trust, or where does that fit in anymore? Philosophically.
I think if you talk to the most far-flung dreamers out there, they would say that there's going to be a lot less need for not auditing, but the actual grunt work piece of it. Let's just say that. Let's put it that way. And again, this is coming from a finance major who failed out of accounting classes. So I just need to be honest that, the nicest thing that Professor Miller ever did for me was say, hey, you have to make an 80 on every single other assignment for the rest of the year, and you've never made an 80 in my class so far. So I think you need to be a finance major. So that was my experience at Mays. It was fantastic. So when I say grunt work, I say the work that I was very awful at doing of all of the true core accounting 316 work. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity to be able to think at a higher level and think a little bit more quickly with having smart contracts put in place that allow, it's verified across 3 different nodes. Those 3 nodes all say this is true, therefore we should process this transaction. We should process this, next piece of the ledger. But building those systems, I think, are going to be the types of things that will be really, really important for everybody in the accounting field going forward, because understanding and understanding how to become an architect around it, I think is just a huge opportunity for writing the smart contracts that will lead to the type of future that you just mentioned, which I think is a little bit far flung and a little bit utopian. To think that there will ever be, we won't need it, everything will be, will exist that way. But I think that there's certainly a lot of people with that level of interest to at least take a couple steps in that direction.
Okay, so the last question is in the chat from David Cox, which is, what's a great resource for understanding blockchain? I know there's a ton out there. How much detail do we need to know, and where do we get that information? What would be great?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll drop two resources in the chat for everybody that hopefully are helpful. One is called Real Vision, and there is just a tremendous amount of free information and conversations on their website, and a lot of video, a lot of good explainers, and they have a couple of like, so I want to learn about this. Where do I start? Type of videos, and then there's a YouTube channel that I really like that's called The Defiant, and that is much more around the decentralized the decentralized world. But I think the Defiant does a really good job of bringing the entertainment side of the industry and taking it out to the rest of the world. So those would be the two that I would recommend.
Okay, perfect. Great. Well, thank you, Andy. Andy, thank you very much for your time today. It was great seeing you. Hope to see you again
Absolutely.
soon on campus at some point hopefully this year. And thank you everyone for showing up. And if you're curious, our Bitcoin conference is going to be the best way to learn more about this. So thank you very much to everybody.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks, Andy.